Hey folks, we're back again, this time with Dave Smith, the editor of UK Street Machine, formerly editor of American Car Magazine and previously worked at Classic American. We are very pleased to have Dave. He is a long-term friend of ours, of Retro Ride, and he is a lovely chap, so welcome Dave.
Hello, David. Thank you very much.
I'm going to start immediately with our very first question, which is always,
Right.
why cars? Why do you like cars?
Do you know what? I do not know where it came from because most of the people I speak to say, "Oh, I got it off my dad or my uncle such a body, or the next door neighbour." But myself, I've no idea because nobody in my family is particularly car orientated. However, if you ask my mother, she will, with minimal prompting, tell you that ever since I was a baby, cars were where it was at. I grew up in a tiny little, I was born in a tiny little town called Torpoint, which is on the mouth of the river that separates Devon and Cornwall. And there's a little car ferry. And apparently, when I was a baby, I would happily sit in my pushchair and just watch the cars come on and off the ferry. So it's a family mystery. Nobody knows where it came from.
Super. That's actually the first time I think we've had someone that's not had a family connection of some description, or just generally been surrounded in a society by cars. Wow,
Absolutely.
that's good. I like that. That's an organic evolution into car enthusiasm.
Or a mystery throwback, one of the two.
Yeah, well, yeah, it could be. What was your first car then? How did you start out life, car wise?
Well, I suppose, strictly speaking, my first car was when I was about 8. I got given a scrap Austin 1800 Land Crab. I think my mother allowed me to have it just to shut me up and give me something to play with. I did various 8-year-old things to it, such as paint it. I do not recommend household emulsion for painting a Land Crab because the first time it rains, it's all on the deck. Um, as a young teen, I got given a Project Morris minor van, which never really happened due to my not realising the significance of welding ability at the start of a project. It never happened. My first road car when I was 17 was a 50 quid Triumph Toledo. So that's where you have to suddenly learn lots of home mechanicking very fast. Because, at the time, it was only 15 years old at the time, and it was rotten. I paid 50 quid for it and I was robbed. It was absolutely hanging. So, but when you're 17 and have no money, you have to learn how to wave spanners at it in a hurry.
Yeah,
So I
for
did.
sure.
And, 50 quid Toledo or not, when you're 17 and you got your own wheels, that's a big deal. And,
Yeah, that makes you one of the mobile people, which is when you're 17.
exactly,
Super
and
important.
you also get volunteered to be the driver whilst everybody else gets drunk.
Yeah.
Which is a bit grim at the time, but it does give you plenty of blackmail ammunition.
I never minded being a designated driver, and eventually I stopped drinking anyway. So I used to end up driving everywhere all the time, and I think that partly why I got so into cars, in that I found I enjoyed driving more than I enjoyed most other things. Weirdly,
I think you're absolutely right. I grew up on a farm. By this time, we'd moved up to the Midlands, and I grew up on a farm. So all my friends lived miles away, and I kind of had to drive. So it was lucky that I did enjoy cars and driving quite as much as I did. Otherwise, it would just have been a chore. But and it was from there. All through, like I say, since I was born, but all through my teens, I got more and more into cars. To the extent that the Toledo just happened to be some wheels, but what I really wanted was a 32 Ford or a 1967 Camaro. Slightly out of the price range of a student.
Little bit.
and the Toledo had to do. So it was still a lot of fun.
So you've worked at a number of magazines. So you've gone from being a 17-year-old with a slightly ropey Toledo to being editor of Street Machine, but previously American Car Magazine. So how did that transition go? You say you're a student, so did you go and study journalism, or did you end up just kind of falling into a role somewhere along the line?
I kind of fell into it. There's certainly no official qualifications behind me. I've got no letters after my name or anything like that. Yeah, it all started off in the 90s. Like I say, since I was a teenager, I've bought Street Machine, Custom Car, and Classic American. And I wrote bits and pieces for, club magazines and fanzines. This was, of course, when fanzines were on paper. I remember when the Hot Rod Gazette and whatnot wrote a few such publications as that. And, having written a few bits and bats, somebody said, "Oh, you should get into writing." And I thought, well, seems like a good idea, lots of nice indoor work, no heavy lifting. And, that one day, I actually applied for a job on Max Power, God help me, but I didn't get it. And then one day I saw an ad for assistant editor on Classic American. Now, I'd been buying Classic American for years anyway. And I applied, and part of the job interview was the editor then, and still is, he's Ben Clemenson. And he sat me down in a room and handed me slides. This was when, most of the magazine's photography was still shot on transparencies. And he handed me some slides and said, "Name these cars." So, holding these little 35mm slides up to the light and saying, "All right, that's a Plymouth Roadrunner, that's this, that's the other." And he said, "Right, well, that's part A done with." And anyway, I made it down to the final two. And then it transpired that the other applicant in the final two had fibbed about having a driving licence.
Oh.
So so I defaulted into the job, and that was in 1999.
I'm wondering who that guy is.
I never did find out, but I never did dig too hard either.
No, I wouldn't dig too hard, just in case they got a vendetta. So, actually, let's rewind a second here. So, you mentioned early on you had the Toledo, and you really wanted a pre-war Ford or a Camaro or something. Yeah. Why American cars appealing to you? Is there something about them that you like so much?
I've no idea, although I suspect this comes from one of the stages in the progression was when I was a young lad. My dad would buy me Motorsport magazine. Even back then it was kind of frightfully posh, really. And you'd read through it, and you'd read all about Formula One and Le Mans and all these races. But to me, they were just completely inaccessible. They may as well have been racing space shuttles for all they meant to me. But then you'd read about rallying. And I thought, yeah, I can recognise these cars. These are cars I've seen on my street that don't quite look or sound like that, but I can recognise these cars. And I got into rallying, and my favourite at the time, early 80s this would be, was the TR7 V8. Because when you went to see the stages, my local stage of the Lombard RAC rally was at Sutton Park. And the TR7 V8 just sounded so much better than all the other cars. And I think that's where I got my love of V8s from, and that sort of segued into American cars over the years.
Gradually evolved into the king of the V8s.
Well, that's it, yeah. Of course, and every time you picked up a copy of Street Machine or Custom Car, they were always mighty fond of V8s. So
I'm always a big fan of those kind of 70s V8s where they're like, I don't know, like 7-litre V8 with 160 brake horsepower.
That's it. The strangled smog motor, absolutely. But At the time, I didn't understand that, but they did enough make a nice noise.
They do make a nice noise. You can't deny it. Even with their restricted power, they make a lovely noise.
Exactly, yeah. Couldn't pull the skin off a pudding, but they did sound the part.
That's great. That's quite a nice sort of mixture as well. You know, being out on the Lombard RAC rally stages, but also having that passion for big, lumpy American cars.
Absolutely, yeah.
I spoke briefly to when I was speaking to Ian Kelly that we talked a little bit about the recognisability of race cars. And it's one of the things that's kind of missing in modern racing in particular, is you can't see the car that you can buy off the forecourt in the car that is racing anymore. And I think that that's quite an important thing for a generation of people to be able to see, you know, your neighbour's got a Chevette and here's one on a rally stage.
Absolutely, yeah, 100% agree. And I mean, that used to be the the impetus for the manufacturers. You know, the old American phrase is "win on Sunday, sell on Monday." Well, it's hard to sell on Monday if what you're trying to sell looks bugger all like what was racing on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I did love that when you'd stand on a rally stage and see Mark II Escorts and yeah, Chevette HS and all these TR7s, and you think, yes, these are cars I can see on my street. I can relate to these cars.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. So, but then weirdly, that's kind of the opposite of the American car scene, because you generally don't see them very often. How was life getting into that scene? Did you find local people to meet up with, or sort of where was your starting point?
It took many years, and I've been through a lot of things, different facets of the scene before I got to it. When I was 16, I went to Shakespeare County Raceway for the first time, and the event that was on there was the Morris Minor Owners Club Custom Chapter Day. And because I had a Morris Minor van, I thought I want to go along to that. And it was a real education. And a tremendous venue. I remember even then I loved it. But after that, it was years before I went back to a drag strip. And in the meantime, I'd started going along to the local grass track, which up my way was Pennine Grass Track, which is up sort of near Ashbourne in Derby. And even there, my favourites, the Class 10s were spectacular. There were these, again, American V8s or other very high-performance engines in these strange home-brewed little single-seat creations with, probably about 500 brake horsepower, but they're about 8 feet long. And they had about a foot of suspension travel at each corner, and they were fantastic. But the cars I'm most identified with were Class 2s, which were 1300cc saloons. And that's where you got old Escorts and, I think there was a Marina once and an Anglia, and that's what I identified with. And yeah, it was a long time after that I started going back to the drag strip. And it was there that I picked up my first American car.
And which was your first American car?
It was a 1973 Chevrolet Camaro in white. Well, it's actually a pair. Yeah,
that's a good start.
It should have been, yes. But this was an American car that had been in the UK for many years. And it was pretty bloody crispy. And it came with a free spares car, which was one of another 73 Camaro, which was one of those that had been built in Belgium. So Belgium, Holland, where did they assemble? Anyway, Antwerp, that's where. And yeah, that was really crispy, and again, just highlighted my lack of welding skill.
Now, have you rectified the welding skills subsequently? Maybe you found a friend that can do it for you.
I can bang patches on to get through an MOT, but I'm not one of these TIG welding artists or anything like that.
No, we've got a manifold on Instagram somewhere. That's a whole different level.
Yeah, they are art, whereas mine is. Well, the grinder is my friend.
Yeah, just smooth out mistakes. I think exactly, everyone needs a grinder somewhere along the line. So you've got into American cars. You're now at Classic American. it feels like there's a natural progression to American car magazine, and to follow that. Was it a thing that occurred naturally, or how did that all come about?
I was at Classic American for 7 or 8 years, and it was wonderful. I mean, you got to go to all the shows that you'd have been going to anyway, but in this case, I was getting paid for it, and that was tremendous. And at the time, I was still, buying and reading Custom Car and Street Machine. I mean, Street Machine was always my favourite magazine. And, at some point around about 2004, Street Machine morphed into American Car World. It morphed over a period of about a year. It was one of those where it was Street Machine featuring American Car World. And that went on, and the American Car bit was kind of a supplement in the middle. Then it moved on to sort of being half and half. Then American Car took over, and eventually Street Machine just disappeared. So I was at Classic American, and American Car was our rival. And then various things of a political nature happened. And in around 2009, a guy who'd left Classic American, he was a designer, left Classic American under a bit of a cloud during a takeover or a swap of publisher.
Yeah.
Yes. He phoned me up out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in years, and he said, I've just bought American Car World. Would you like to do some writing for us? Now, at the time, I was working behind the counter of my local motor factors, and I said, yeah, I really would. And I came on board with him and the editor, who was another guy who'd left Classic American. And, American Car World. Eventually we dropped the World because that belonged to the publishing house, which published other things, Triumph World, Jaguar World, so on. Yeah. So we dropped the World, and it just became American Car Magazine. And that was great. And then that editor went on, and I got his job, and suddenly I was editor of a car mag, and that was tremendous. That was in 2010. And, things were great. It was, still going back round the shows, and I got to spend all day, every day, talking to people about American cars and writing about them, and honestly couldn't imagine anything I'd rather do.
That's like a dream job, really.
Well, exactly, yeah.
So then we're sort of kind of approaching the Street Machine relaunch at this point. So I have vague memories of it kind of being announced and rumoured, and sort of there was, before it actually got announced that it was relaunching, there was a lot of, I wonder what happened to Street Machine, etc., kind of conversations, and then it was like, oh yeah, it turned into American Car World and American Car Magazine, and like it just sort of disappeared, and that's the end of that. And then suddenly there's somewhat more crispy rumours of it actually happening.
Some of which was started by me, to be fair.
Oh yeah, I can imagine now that that may have been seeded. So how did that come about? Like, what was the conversation and like?
Well, he started the publishing house. By this time, the chap who used to work for Classic American, who bought up American Car, had sort of sold out to another publishing company, and the chaps who ran that was saying, oh, they published a load of other titles, but nothing to do with cars. And they said, oh, if you hear of any magazines for sale, coming up for sale as a going concern, we'd like to expand our portfolio and all this sort of tripe. And I said, well, you know what? When I was a lad, I really loved this magazine, Street Machine. It disappeared in about 2004. It could do with coming back. And as soon as I said it, I thought, right, that's the last I'll ever hear of that. And lo and behold, I heard nothing, except one guy in the room was listening. And then a year or two later, after that publishing company had folded, again another phone call out the blue saying, I've just bought Street Machine, do you want to be editor of Street Machine? And I said, well, I've wanted to be editor of Street Machine since I was like 14 years old, so yes please. And yeah, that was 3.5 years ago now.
That's incredible. So that'll be Matty.
That's right.
Yes. So you're relaunching Street Machine, and you were a Street Machine reader, as were a lot of us, and you must have had a weight of expectation both on yourself and externally on you from everybody. How did you handle that? Did you just ignore it and forge ahead with your own kind of plans? Like, what did you do?
I kind of knew what was to be expected, in as much as it's one of those, if you're going to do a focus group or some such rubbish, you've got to think, who is my ideal reader? Who is my ideal customer? And that was really easy because it's me. I wanted to put out the magazine that I would have wanted to see when I was 14 or 15. So yeah, I knew what the content should be and what it kind of shouldn't be, and which bits of the magazine I really liked and which I could have done without. I mean, obviously I was reading the magazine through the 90s, and you may remember that Max Power was a kind of spin-off from Street Machine. At least it came from the same publisher and ended up using some of the same stuff. And to my mind, it's like, right, I don't want any Max Power influence. I want it to be exactly what I remembered reading about when I was a lad, what shaped my tastes.
Perfect.
So I did know what I wanted to see. However, I also know that things have moved on a touch from the 90s. And I mean, back then, like I say, in the 80s and 90s, when I was buying Street Machine, a Mark 1 or Mark 2 Escort was a chav car. And Capris were like, oh no, that's just a Barry Boy car. And now, I mean,
Lord, Barry Boys is a phrase I haven't heard for a while.
This is it, and yeah, so how things have moved on, and I have to respect that. And there's a whole world of possibilities in terms of content out there, and of which you are very much a part. Your scene,
Good Lord.
And but this is it. I mean, it is keeping that fine line between. I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way of saying this, but a number of readers have a very sort of narrow view. It's got to be a hot rod, it's got to be pre-war, it's got to be X or Y or Z. I don't think so. I think that there are no rules. That's part of what attracted me to the whole Street Machine scene, is that there are no rules. There's good engineering and there's bad engineering. But other than that, there are no hard and fast rules. So, whereas a number of people might see, say, a Mazda MX-5. Oh, no, that's a modern car, that's far too modern for Street Machine. Well, hang on, the Mazda MX-5 is over 30 years old. Yeah. If you think of the first issue of Street Machine that came out in 1979, had a Mark II console on the cover, you may remember it, Henry High Rise. And that is one of the most iconic cars on the British scene. But at the time, it was only like 15 years old. And I think people conveniently forget this.
Yeah, definitely. I picked up an old issue of Hot Car because there was a Trans Am van picture that turned up on the forum, and I just wanted to know more about it. And the only place to find more information about it was this one issue of Hot Car that it appeared in. So I bought that. Imported that from the States, got it over. I'm looking at it, it's great, but it's whatever year it is, like a 1977 or something.
Yeah.
And the van is a 1976 van. It's a year old. So it's like, to us, it's like this old school hot rod custom van thing, but at the time it would have been like modifying last year's Transit.
Well, it's basically buying a brand new vehicle and doing crazy things to it.
And I think that's people kind of have a habit of forgetting that, like the project cars in Street Machine often weren't particularly old. They'd be 10 years, maybe 15 at the most, because they were cheap. And it's like buying an early 2000s saloon car now. You can pick them up for 200-300 quid, and that's what effectively Street Machine was doing, at least for their project cars at the time, as well as featuring obviously pre-war rods and stuff like that.
Well, absolutely, and again, it comes back to accessibility because when when I was a lad, a pre-war Ford hot rod or a '67 Camaro was still out of my price range, and it always has been, and chances are it always will be because this is not a game to be in if you want to get rich. So I'll make do with what I can get, and that always seemed to be a good ethos of the street machine ethos. I mean, it always used to be the catchphrase was "Dare to be different,"
Yeah.
and that means you can work with what you've got. And if what you've got is, the 10-year-old car that your mum let you have when you passed your test when you were 17, great. If what you've got happens to be something you've paid £100,000 for at auction, great. Work with what you've got, do something. And this is what I liked. It was the inclusivity. I mean, a lot of people remember the 70s as the halcyon days of customising, when you could, on every street, you'd find a jacked up Mark III Cortina or a HB Viva with a furry dashboard and Weller wheels. And it's kind of grown from there. But what I don't like to see is the snobbiness. That's not a real hot rod because. And if you want to start a fight somewhere, at a rod show, ask people to describe, ask people to tell you what is a hot rod. What does hot rod mean? And I hope you've bought a packed lunch because that one will run and run.
Yeah, you've seen the slammed Land Rover over the P6 chassis, I think it is. That was basically built around that whole idea of it was actually directly at the NSRA. Sorry, chaps, if you're listening. The idea that it has to be pre-40, whatever it is, 349, pre-47. So they got a Series 1 Land Rover and slammed it over the chassis, and it's like sits right on the floor. And they drove it into the show, and they're like, "That's exactly what this is. This is a pre-40. Yep. It's a 47 Land Rover."
And it's got a flat windscreen, and it fits the letter of the rules.
It's got a V8 in it and everything, and I think that's kind of one of the dangers of having rules. It's not even so much you alienate people, but you then kind of open yourself, not quite to ridicule, but you do start to look a little bit silly sometimes. Like people going on about classic Fords, they can only be like chrome bumper models and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, that's not necessarily the case because time moves forwards. So, I'm glad you kind of kept that ethos. That's what I quite liked about Street Machine, as you say. The accessibility, to me, defines a Street Machine car.
Absolutely. And like you say about it's not real unless it's X or Y or Z. Nonsense. Unless you're trying to sell it as something that it's not, then I say, who cares, really? I mean, classic Fords to me, you're right. The chrome or the metal bumper models, are to me classic Fords. However, now, I mean, have you seen the price of a nice early RS Turbo? Clearly, there are people who are champing at the bit for these cars now, and to them, that is a classic car. That's the car they remember from when they were a lad, and before they had the family and the mortgage and times were lovely, and back then I had an RS Turbo and I was king of the streets, and that's wonderful. It's just got to be whatever floats your boat.
I think that in some ways actually that's the difference from Street Machine to some other magazines. And again, there's no right or wrong to this. It's just the audience targeting, but the Street Machine stuff does feel perhaps a little bit more accessible for someone just starting out, as well as obviously showing some really top quality custom cars alongside those things. Whereas a lot of magazines, I think, would only show the highest level of modification that they can, because there's a limited number of pages in their magazine. I like that Street Machine will show something a little bit more accessible.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and that's, again, like I say, my ideal customer is me. And while I can appreciate, a six-figure hot rod car from Billet as much as the next man, it goes back to the old Formula One and Motorsport magazine. It's beautiful to look at, but completely unachievable for me. Whereas, turn a couple of pages and there's a guy with a Beetle who's done something absolutely fantastic, but he's got maybe £4,000 in it. And I think that's almost as much of an achievement as the six-figure hot rod. I say almost as much. It's a greater achievement. You've achieved more with fewer resources. And a lot more hard graft, and a lot more hours, and a lot more ideas. And there's room for everybody. The scene isn't big enough by any stretch to be subdividing everybody down into little niches and pigeonholes. And I think that it's high time we all realise this, is that there's so many outside forces, arbitrary forces acting upon what we'd call the scene, that there's no room for division anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think when sort of peak car interest size probably, well, it goes up and down obviously, but like the 70s was huge, and then again kind of tail end of the 90s, early 2000s, that whole max power era still had quite a lot of other things going on as well. Everything was quite buoyant at the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think you could afford the kind of paring down and divisions then, but yeah, it's interesting. Nowadays, you're right. I think that perhaps it's not the time to be splitting things out, and I think in many ways it's not. Like the community has kind of come a bit more together in its appreciation of stuff. Like our little show has hot rods and custom cars turn up of various sorts alongside everything else. But I think people.
I like the way you say your little show, as if it doesn't Phil Shelsley Walsh or Goodwood, which I've yet to get to. But sorry, do carry on.
It's all right. But I think also you'll see people with more modern stuff going along to like whatever nostalgia drags or old Warden Wheels Day stuff like that perhaps they might not have gone to before, but now that everything's compressed a little bit, and I think that's only a healthy thing. I think that's a great thing. So out of all of that, how do you pick your content? So you've got an empty magazine layout in some description, and you've got to decide what's going in it. So out of that whole mass of stuff, how are you picking it?
It's tricky, but I'll try and include as broad a spread of years and styles as I can. I mean, normally in a magazine there's, say, 3 main feature cars. So if one's American, then at least one of the others has got to be British. And if one is clearly a really high dollar build, then I'll try and offset it with something that's a lot more budget. And yeah, it's kind of it's difficult in every issue to try and represent the broadness of the spectrum. And it is often trying to offset one thing against another. I mean, I could fill a magazine every month with 32 Fords. I could fill it with 60s Mustangs, no problem. But that doesn't show how broad the scene is. And then you got completely left field things that take everybody by surprise, and the readers love them. I don't know if you saw a couple of issues ago, we had a guy with a late 60s Skoda MB1000. And in the back, hanging out the back by a considerable margin, was an air-cooled Tatra V8. Now that guy is clearly bonkers, but I thought that was wonderful, and he built it all himself. And my hat is right off to anybody who can conceive of anything that crazy. I love a restored 68 Mustang Fastback as much as the next man, but if it's restored to factory spec, then that's a very tight brief. Whereas this guy clearly has no briefs at all, for want of a better word. and just thought, what's the craziest thing I can build in my yard? A rear engine car with a 2.5 litre air cooled V8. Yeah, I'll build that. That'll be safe and sensible. And just went and did it. And there are so many other aspects to the scene, and so many of them are probably more retro orientated than custom or hot rod orientated. I mean, we've had some We had a guy in not so long back with a Toyota Cressida, or Cressida, and that was a tremendous. It had a Lexus Straight Six in it, and that was wonderful. But who the hell would think hot rod equals Toyota Cressida? It's
Yeah.
and yet you look at it and you think the way he's built that, the attention to detail, the engineering that's gone into it, you cannot take a damn thing away from that guy. It's a wonderful machine.
I think it's interesting as well with some of the hot rod guys. They're kind of like the old school hot rod guys. They're seeing cars that would have been modern to them, being modified in the way that they're modifying cars that are classic to them, if you see what I mean. So they're modifying 30s and stuff that was perhaps built before they were born but was influencing them when they were growing up. But at the same time, they may have had a Cressida or something, or not even bothered with it because it was ridiculous Japanese cars. But now this generation of people is modifying stuff like this. They're looking at them with fresh eyes, which I think is quite a nice thing to put in front of them, and Street Machine is managing to do that. Is, you know, here's these things that you've probably forgotten about or wish to forget about, and there's this new generation of people doing things to it.
This is it. It is a case of, you broaden your outlook. Because, yes, you might have a 32 Ford tucked away in the garage, but look, here comes a Mark V Cortina, which in its day was the most mediocre car on the road, but now you look at it and they stand out a mile, and it's wow, Mark V Cortina. I remember I had one of them when I was 18, and so on and so forth. The mediocre has suddenly become really special and very different and stands out a mile.
Yeah, definitely.
And that forces you to take a new look at it, I think.
Yeah, because they're not ubiquitous anymore, so you get to look at them with new eyes. So it's good to be pulling content from different places. Is there anywhere you kind of haven't gone yet, like a car you've gone, oh, I kind of want to put that in, but I know that's going to upset people?
Yeah, there have been a few. I mean, a photographer the other day said, it's an Ultima, one of those sort of mid-engined Le Mans style cars, and I thought that's probably pushing a bit. I've had one guy say, oh, I've got a feature car here for you. It appeared in Max Power back in 2001. And I looked at the photos and I thought, if I put that in Street Machine, I'm going to get strung up. However, one day, Max Power will be nostalgia. I'm sure there are people now thinking of Max Power with the same rose-tinted glasses I thought of Street Machine in the 80s.
Absolutely, I can guarantee you that's happening because there's a Instagram account called Max Power Reunion, and they post up old Max Power cars and features and like where are they now and all that kind of stuff, and they get a huge response. And weirdly, a couple of my friends have been sort of tagged in their things, and I kind of looked at it, and I now follow that because it's an insight into a scene that I very much was not a part of. It was the opposite of everything I liked about cars.
Yeah.
But given the time and the space, and actually the very cherry-picked nature of it, it's not, 50 cars an issue. It's just this one car from this one issue that everyone remembers. And
yeah.
I'm sort of like appreciating it in a way which I didn't before. So I think it may well come around. I think it's a hard sell with like the insane body kits and the stereo cars that were there just for the noise. But there are gems in there that have stood the test of time that you look at now and you go, oh, actually, you know what? That's not bad. In fact, I shared one the other day. There was a 4x4 Cosworth running gear in a Capri, and it was beautifully done. It was like
and that would drop right into Street Machine.
Yeah, exactly. So they're out there, and I think that a bit of distance gives you a bit of appreciation. It's a bit like the nostalgia stuff. In fact, you've put a few of these in the magazine. You've got these kind of very leery 70s customs with they're all jacked up at the back, and you've got like the polished diff cover and all of that kind of stuff. The Jaguar.
Oh yeah, with the red light on it. Yeah,
yeah, and all of that stuff. But in the 80s and 90s, that was just horrible, and you hated it. But now you look at it, and you're like, I actually, that's pretty cool.
Well, fashion is cyclic, and like I say, the way you feel about max power cars is the same way I feel about max power cars. However, one day they'll come back around. But it's like right at the minute, there's been a big resurgence of interest in old custom cars. And I mean from the 70s and early 80s, the heyday of the indoor show. And they keep coming back out the woodwork. I mean, there's one guy specifically I'm thinking of who did a great series of recreations. And I mean, these recreations were bloody perfect. But there are a lot of the original custom and show cars that have been hidden away under tarps in garages for decades are suddenly coming back out and being rebuilt. To the extent that right at the minute, half of the new builds that are going on are old builds. And there are some survivors out there, obviously, ones that have never really left the scene. A couple of crazy Ian Etheridge paint job cars. There's one was in an early issue of the relaunched Street Machine, a Capri called Venom. And there was a Pontiac called Celestial, which currently, I believe, lives up in Southport, or not Southport, somewhere in Lancashire, Morecambe, sorry. And you look at them and you think, what drugs were they on when they built that car? It's just way out there. I mean, this Pontiac Trans Am has a fin on the boot lid like a D-type Jag, and all the front end's been rearranged, and there are tubes and side pipes and the craziest paint job you could ever conceive. And it's survived, even though for probably the intervening 30 years, it's, it's offending my eyes. But now, it's an amazing survivor original custom car. And people are going crazy for them again.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it's sort of come around, that there's sort of enough distance that like the fashions that drove it no longer matter. So it's just the car in and of itself, and you look at it and it's aesthetically pleasing, or at least interesting, we should say.
Definitely great, interesting.
But it's kind of also possibly the antithesis of modern cars. Sorry, modern car people. But like they're all grey and black and maybe blue if you're lucky, and it's kind of the opposite of that, to have this ridiculously loud, leery car. I think it's part of the reason why people like Bozuzuku cars so much, that they've managed to bleed out into the consciousness of the wider car community, because they're the opposite of what's out there for you to buy off the forecourt.
I mean, I'm damn sure that every generation for the past 100 years have said, "Ooh, cars today all look the same." And I'm sorry, I'm now well into middle age. I'm an old fart. I can say that all cars today look the same. And I think that things like you said, what you said, the Bosuzuku cars and these wild 70s customs they're sort of subverting that. They're sort of saying, well, you're all trying to climb into your cookie cutter saloons or SUVs or crossovers now, I suppose. Look, here's a car with loads of crazy guff added to it, and an exhaust pipe that sticks 6 feet up in the air for no reason, or a car with 150 different shades of paint and 18 layers of lacquer on it. Why? Because I can, and because nobody else will. And if I don't, then I'm worried I'm going to become as dull as you.
That'll be why the max power cars are going to come back around.
Well, absolutely. Exactly, and I mean, like I say, they did nothing for me, but it was a powerful movement in its day. People got off their backsides and went to these cruises, and yeah, I know the cruises had a bit of a reputation for attracting the coppers.
Yes.
But then you talk to these guys who say, "Oh, it's not like it was in my day in the 70s when we went to the Chelsea cruise and did burnouts up and down the King's Road."
Yeah,
which is
exactly
the sort of behaviour you're now calling these guys for doing.
Actually, this segues a little bit into my question from Ian Kelly for you, which was, do you see EV electric conversions as a positive future trend for the old car scene or not? Which is a debating question.
It certainly is. And I mean, there's no way around it. Electric is the future, whether we like it or not. And when that day comes, I think a true customizer, a true hot rodder will adapt. I mean, there are already people building cars, mostly for shows such as SEMA. Electric hot rods, electric muscle cars. Chevrolet will sell you a package to drop an electric motor directly into your muscle car. It'll bolt up to the automatic gearbox. And away you go. People are looking around the edges. I think the only real issue I can see is that to what I'll, us proper petrol heads, it's the sound. The sound of a V8, the sound of a highly tuned 6-pot turbo. You can't replace it. I don't care how clever your car is. If it plays the noise of a big block through the speakers, that is just alcohol-free beer, isn't it? You need somebody who values the noise of a car so much. Finding that the current one makes no noise at all is, I suppose, anathema.
I find my thought process with this is there's going to be a generation of people for whom that electric motor whine eventually becomes the equivalent. Because if you hear a high-powered electric race car as they sort of launch and stuff, they make a very distinctive noise that's very different to what you hear in an electric road car. And I wonder if there'll be a generation where eventually that's a thing. They'll be like, oh yeah, listen to that whine, and then your Tesla
you
sounds
hear it
rubbish.
coming. You hear it coming, and you can identify it. Yeah. I mean,
maybe.
I
doubt it.
I think that's the thing. Right at the minute is, all your hardcore hot rodders are going, oh, electric car, bloody scale electrics. No, it's V8s for me. And as long as somebody's still digging dinosaur juice out of the ground and turning it into petrol, they will be petrol heads. But eventually, there's no getting away from it. One day, long after my time, petrol would just be, something you tell your grandkids about.
Yeah,
And
my thought with that is that horses didn't disappear. We just stopped using them as much. But people that are enthusiastic about horses, people that are enthusiastic about horses are still enthusiastic about horses and bicycles and penny farthings and whatever else. So
absolutely,
my hope is that will be supported in some manner.
And not just in a museum.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only thing is that, future governments could well ban internal combustion in the name of the environment. They're not likely to ban horses or penny farthings. But other than that, yeah, you're dead right. It's like you say, a horse has become, I'd say, a hobby. I'm sure horse lovers out there would probably throw dung at me for saying that.
It's a way of life.
Yes, absolutely. In the same way that petrol heads see cars.
Yeah, for sure. Interestingly, the last car museum I was in had an electric car in it from 1906. So that was pretty impressive. One of the very, very first cars ever produced. It was in Auto World in Belgium. And it was battery as well. It wasn't anything different to what's happening now. And to go further, you'd just put new batteries in it, which is... I was talking to a designer the other day, and they were saying that's kind of one of the things they've been looking at. Instead of charging, you kind of swap out your batteries at stations to keep going. And that's amazing that the technology just sort of goes round and round and round. And round.
Absolutely. And there was a point back then, I think it was in the early part of the 20th century, or the very, very late 19th, where... most of the cars sold in one given year were electric. However, it's now new technology. It's now the very latest tech, and it's not just a revival of something that happened 100 odd years ago.
Yeah,
but
a path we didn't go down. So, what
exactly,
would you like to see more of in cars? The Betamax, the Betamax of cars. What would you like to see more of in cars? What would you like to see people building more of in the UK?
Well, whatever takes their fancy. I mean, I know
What's
what
pushing
I
your
love.
buttons then? What would if someone came to you and said, Dave, I got your perfect car for your next issue. What would that be?
Well, unfortunately, that would be kind of a gestalt of about a dozen different cars. Because, I mean, like I say, yes, you got your classic hot rods, if you will. You've got your muscle cars, both wonderful. I'd happily own either. And then you've got your crazy left field stuff. And I love the fact that it's the left field stuff that continues to surprise me. Again, going back to the guy with the Cressida, that really surprised me. And who'd have thought it? So if somebody comes up to me with a car that makes me go, wow, I'd never have thought of that, that's what really floats my boat. I mean, I posted on our Facebook page the other day, there's an advert on Facebook Marketplace for an Austin 3 litre. You know, one of those big, sort of like Superland crabs with a 3 litre engine. And he's put bubble arches on it and painted it Rothman's colours. Brilliant! Who the hell would have thought of that? And I saw that and I thought, oh yeah, I want a bit of that. But the worst thing that could happen to me, I think, in life is to win the lottery. Because I'd end up with like 1,000 cars that I've seen that I've gone, yeah, I want that, and I'd be living in a tent. So there is no simple answer to that question. I'll know it when I see it.
Our mutual friend Simon Coulson has a great plan for a lottery win, which is to open up a car museum for British modifying and gradually accumulate the older cars and obviously take them out to events and stuff, but all of those iconic cars, gradually accumulate them. So let's do that with a lottery win. That'd be great.
We'll pool it and do exactly that, because that sounds ideal. It's sort of a custom kibbutz.
I recently won a lucky dip. I don't know when that's happening, but maybe this is my time. So we talked a little bit about actually this with the old electrical stuff. What are your challenges are you seeing for the custom car community in the UK of all sorts?
Well, I think it's twofold. One is coming from up on high, and as again we press on towards electrification, and it's almost like the people who love petrol or love diesel for that matter. It's almost like we're going to be vilified. You know, we aren't just people who really like cars for the sake of loving machinery and enjoying the cars for what they are. If we're not careful, we're going to get painted as the evil buggers who are out to do nothing but destroy the environment. Depending on who is saying these things and what their agenda is, which is never a good thing. The other is, I think my end of the scene here desperately needs to sort of widen its viewpoint and realise that all different branches of the car scene, we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. And as I said earlier, we can't afford to be dividing ourselves into pigeonholes. We're all car enthusiasts. We all want roughly the same thing. We need to band together. And we can't be doing with these. That's not a real hot rod because we can't be. Oh no, you can't let him in. That's a Mark II Escort. We all need to realise. I think that all of us car enthusiasts need to provide a united front. Which sounds a bit Citizen Smith. I do apologise.
That's fine.
But it is. Time to realise that we are all pulling in the same direction, and that car fans are car fans no matter what they love, really.
For your first point, I think I have a weird thing. Johnny Smith, actually, I spoke to him about this a while ago. I don't even know if this was in the podcast or if it was just a conversation we were having. But he was saying that the thing about having electric cars is, as long as kind of petrol isn't legislated off the road or diesel, it actually kind of gives a bit of breathing room to car enthusiasts, because suddenly the weight of all of the fossil fuel burning is not on these handful of enthusiasts that are kind of running their cars at the weekends and going motorsport of some description, because the majority of cars on the road are now, electric. And we know that's not carbon neutral, but full life cycle theoretically is better. My wife works in environmental science, so apparently it actually is. I can't even argue that point. The full life cycle of the modern electric car is going to be better for the environment, but that gives us space to actually run some petrol cars because there's less of them and it's fine. That's the argument, but it's whether or not the way, as you say, the powers that be behave can help us do that. And in the second point, that actually feeds into the first. And you're right that we should be united in a manner because we are car enthusiasts, and as a whole we're under threat. It feels too much, but we should at least be in a position to be able to, in a united manner, go, no, this is what we think, and be able to put that forward. And I don't think there's really that many bodies representing the enthusiast in the UK.
You're right.
Probably should be.
This is it, and I remember a couple of years ago there was there were a few organisations started up, mainly in response to new government legislation, especially around things like IVA, which I think is a threat that hasn't yet particularly reared its ugly head in terms of custom cars, mainly because it seems that nobody is 100% sure of what the rules are. In terms of, if you've modified your vehicle at all, well, what do you class as modified? If you have a Mark 1 Cortina and it's on radial tyres, is that a modified vehicle? And not to begin leaning on I've cut the bulkhead and transmission tunnel out of my car to fit a sodding great V8. Have I modified my monocoque? Yeah. Well, yes, but unless somebody comes around to check it, we'll have to take your word for it. And at the minute, everything is so very grey that nobody really knows the answers. Consequently, there's nothing to support or protest. But one day, I fear there will be. And who is representing the car enthusiasts? Is it a bunch of disparate groups who are more likely to be fighting against each other? Is it just a handful of keyboard warriors on Facebook, or is it going to be a concerted effort to put our points across, as you said, to say, here we are, this is what we do. We're not out to destroy the environment. We don't chop up whales at a weekend. We need to be, I'm not going to say thump our tub and demand to be listened to, but at least say, do you realise what we're here for, what we're about?
I think in some ways America's got it a little bit better because they got SEMA and have had for a very long time.
A very powerful lobby, yeah.
That's the thing. We know them from the show and all that kind of stuff, but like at the heart of it, they are there representing the aftermarket equipment manufacturers, which is a huge business, obviously, in the States, and which is why at SEMA you'll see everything from brand new cars through to hot rods and some of the biggest names come out there because they are broad. They cover everything, and there's nothing like that as far as I can see in the UK or really in Europe. I had a quick look around a couple of years ago, and there was some sort of bodies, but they seem very much more in the representing OEM manufacturers, suppliers, rather than aftermarket. Sort of seem to forget that is a massive part of the car community, and also in terms of bringing talent through to the OEM people. So yeah, I think if I was to get on a soapbox, it wouldn't be so much as around what needed to be said. It would be more around there needs to be an organisation that says this, and then there's kind of like an opening for something like that somewhere along the line. And as much for the custom car community as for people that are buying a brand new car and dropping it on air ride, like we all need representation, really.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that is part of the problem, is that hitherto trying to get all these different aspects of the scene together must have been like herding ferrets. And getting everybody to arrange themselves and not bicker and look at the bigger picture. And yeah, that's kind of what needs to happen, and that's what needs representation. I mean, obviously your OEMs and franchises have their big powerful trade lobby, the SMMT. But for a country that prides itself on its motorsport, technology and heritage and this, that and the other, we don't seem to be looking after it as well as we should.
I'm gonna change atmosphere because we got dark. We got dark.
It did rather, didn't it? I do apologise.
Yeah. No, it's all right. If my questions led in that direction, and there's no need to be dark. We got exciting cars. So I'm gonna
I'll get down off my soapbox then.
Oh, sorry, you have to put it away. You can do it on one of your Facebook lives later on. So I'm going to ask you one of my kind of emergency questions, just because I like them, because it put a nice break after the politics of that. So, what's the fastest you've been in a car?
Oh, crikey! I suspect I've been driven around a couple of racetracks. I've driven myself around a couple of racetracks, but that's not amounted to much. I have had a couple of far more talented people passenger me around racetracks. And obviously, I don't know what speed it was, but to my bladder, it felt like about 300 miles an hour. On the road, I suspect it was in a Roush Mustang on the M6 toll, which I was under the man in the pub impression was not particularly well patrolled by the coppers, and I really, really needed to get to the services for a wee. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I think, yes, and I think that was about 145. But
Good
it was a
Lord.
borrowed car, and at that point I noticed that the fiberglass bonnet was sort of bowing in the middle, and I thought, I want to return this car in the same shape as I borrowed it. So I backed off a bit at that point.
How very responsible. What's the scariest car you've been in? It doesn't have to be a fast car. It could just be something that was lashed together.
Pretty much any car I've ever owned. Over the years, I've owned probably about 150 cars, and it's been the most frightening catalogue of crap you'd ever wish not to read through. So kind of any car I've ever owned is likely to fall into that. In terms of being under somebody else's control, it was probably a Fiat 126 with an 1100cc Yamaha engine in. The owner took me out for a quick spin, but where he lived was on the sort of the reclaimed land on Merseyside, so all the roads were dead straight for about a quarter of a mile, then a 90-degree turn, then dead straight for another quarter mile, then a 90-degree turn, with drainage ditches on either side. That was bicycle clips time, because with a locked diff and a motorbike engine, and a car that weighed about 400 kilos empty, it didn't want to turn. So each of those 90-degree bends was an adventure in itself.
Yeah, I'll happily leave that to somebody else's experience. I was going to ask you what cars you regret selling, but maybe I should ask you which cars you regret buying, and you can list all 150.
All of them. Pretty much all of them I've regretted buying almost instantly after having parted with money.
You're going to buyer's regret straight away.
That's it. I don't know why I bothered buying the car. I should have just gone straight to the regret and saved myself some money. But yeah, I mean, I had a long-term passion for Triumph Dolomites, which not sprints or anything particularly interesting, just cheap 1500s. They were lovely. The best car I've ever bought, and the one I can't bring myself to part with, was a 1979 Chevy El Camino. Which was my daily driver for about 1.5 years, and then it came to MOT time, and I realised that it needed everything. So I parked it up, awaiting the day when I'd have the time and money to actually do it. That was 10.5 years ago, and it's still exactly where I parked it, and nothing's getting better.
Is it getting worse?
In fact, I'd suggest it's getting worse, which is something of a disappointment to me.
Ah,
But
damn you, time! Damn you!
exactly, it comes to us all. But yeah, it's.
Is that ever going to get done? Do you think? Are you going to get there?
I sincerely hope so. It'll also be the last thing I ever sell. My kidneys will go before the El Camino. I have, yes, and I don't really want to impose upon their charity any more than I absolutely have to.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I would very much love to bring that Camino out again.
Ah, superb. Well, we look forward to that day. So it's a strange year. We're getting another Street Machine at some point, I'm assuming. Is that's happening?
Yes, and I was talking about it with Matty today. I was sincerely hoping that it's going to be at the end of next month, the September issue out at the end of August. Obviously, there are various challenges to this, not least of which is trying to get a load of the advertisers back on board, because
hard work.
Everybody has been hit hard by the events of the past couple of months. And obviously, being a magazine, a lot of our advertisers at this time of year will be events, most of which are cancelled or postponed or whatever. And then there are shops and companies that have been shut and had to furlough their workers, so they're doing nothing. There were importers who've really suffered from the dip in the exchange rates. And suddenly all the advertisers are, they have been for the past few months, battening down the hatches, and no advertisers means no mag. It's not an easy game to be in at the best of times, as you well know.
As I well know, it's quite difficult to launch magazines.
Yes,
it's very easy to fail at launching magazines, though.
It's like the old joke about how to become a millionaire in publishing.
Yeah, quite.
Start with 5 million and wait.
I think, hopefully we can get you back on track, because we do love our Street Machine magazine. You're also doing lots of you do your weekly stuff on Facebook at the moment, so which I think you're actually going to do after this, even though this will come out next Tuesday.
That's right. Shortly I shall be doing. I do the Facebook, the lives on the Street Machine Magazine UK Facebook page. You started off as a once a month thing, but when lockdown came in, I thought it's my missus, who's far more savvy with all this sort of thing than I am. She said I should do these lives, basically to put a face to things, and I started doing them weekly during lockdown, because people had bugger all else to do. But having not thought it through, I thought, well, that also means I've got bugger all to talk about. However, I've been delighted to be proved wrong, and people always find something to talk about, and it's very entertaining, and you get to hear about what's going on out there. And
I think people are missing car chat. I found that with people listening to this, hello people listening to this right now, that people are missing having someone to talk to about cars, even if they're just sort of sitting on the edge of a conversation, enjoying the conversation.
Exactly, and obviously, up until Easter, you'd go out for your to shows at weekends. You go out to the weeknight cruise at the pub, or the Sunday morning breakfast meet, or whatever else, and meet your friends and banter about cars. And all of a sudden, it's like, no, sit at home, stay at home, don't move, don't even look through the letterbox. And we've all missed the car banter. And if it can't be live and face to face, then media such as this is may as well make good use of it, rather than post pictures of your breakfast.
Yes, I've also found that I've been buying magazines more, which I've been buying Classic and Sports Car again. Sorry, rival publications. I don't suppose that's a rival for Street Machine, but I've been buying it again because it's filling a gap of looking at cars I don't really look at on the internet or have any connection with on the internet, but at a car show I would have a browse around and a look at, and I find it's really interesting, kind of the changing approach to consuming stuff that this weird period we find ourselves in has has forced upon us. But I'm hoping it continues. Some of it's really good.
Yeah,
like really enjoying
this
it.
is it. You've broadened your horizons, and a damn good idea. I mean, on the other side of that, of course, is that since lockdown, there have been a number of magazines disappear.
Yeah, that's really sad.
This was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and that's a real shame, because if there's one thing I don't want to see less of, it's print. Not that I've got a vested interest or anything, but yeah, it's such a shame, and you go and I looked around the shops the other day, and there are a lot of gaps on the magazine shelves.
Yeah, it's not
Mine being one of them. Oh, good
yeah.
God, no, it's everything. Yeah.
It's a difficult time for publishing, so support print, because it's actually where a lot of the stuff you find on the internet comes from.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I say, I grew up with centrefolds from Street Machine and whatnot pinned to my wall. See, paper lasts a long time, unless you put it in direct sunlight, in which case, yeah.
Paper does last a long time.
As I say, the number of people I still meet who say, "Hey, I've got every issue since number 1 in 1979."
It's amazing.
So yeah, there are a lot of people who live in absolute fire traps because they've kept every magazine they've ever bought.
Simon and his car archive is a case in point.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, I will leave it there because we are approaching our time. So as and when you can, support Dave and the lovely Street Machine family for continuing to soldier away and broaden people's horizons. Nowadays, you have a vanishingly small amount of places to find the sort of cars that we like, and Street Machine is one of those places. And follow them on Facebook, and they have an Instagram account, which I complain at them they don't update often enough, but they also have that. Yes, thank you very much for your time, Dave. That has been very enjoyable.
No, thank you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. And thanks to anybody who's listened this far.
Yeah, well done. Congratulations. And this is the end.